Our top story is the new release of this literal final chapter in the special counsel, Jack Smith's January 6 coup probe. Smith's 137-page report released today on the, quote, efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following that 2020 election. This Smith report follows the precedent of the Mueller report, a major legal document which recounts a crime spree by Trump allies who faced a legal reckoning. Like that report, this new one matters today. In contrast to that report, however, the Smith report comes after Donald Trump's recent re-election, and there are legal rules ending the prosecution that the former defendant Trump faced. So we begin right there on that point. The most striking assertion in this brand new report, which came in the conclusion as the final sentence of this new Smith report today, is the formal statement that Smith had enough evidence to convict Trump at trial. That is a key takeaway, and I'm going to go through several takeaways with you right now. We encourage you to read excerpts of the whole report, but right now I've got the key parts. The report refers to the rule against prosecuting a sitting president. Everyone knew that would kick in if the defendant, Donald Trump, won. And so the report states, but for Mr. Trump's election, the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain a conviction at trial. A striking conclusion from a respected prosecutor backed by the DOJ. It reinforces just how close Trump came to that trial, which may have led to conviction. While, as always, we responsibly note that as a defendant, Trump, the former defendant, was legally presumed innocent. Smith made precedent with the first federal indictment of an ex-president. Today, he stands by it with a new precedent about that now former defendant turned president-elect. So I can tell you this report does not offer one sweeping story, unlike, say, the original coup indictment of former defendant Trump. It's not supposed to. And I'll explain it very clearly. Under law, every special counsel writes a final report explaining their decisions to charge or not through this process and to Congress. And so today we're learning some new things about the inner workings of Smith's long secretive, private, confidential, whatever word you want to use, an investigation that we didn't see into very much. That includes legal factors about Trump's lies and deceit, which DOJ assessed in how it pursued and charged him, finding that Trump had a corrupt purpose to, quote, ensure no one other than himself was certified as the president, even though Biden won. And the report cites evidence that Trump had these admissions. He knew he'd lost. And prosecutors were ready to show jurors how Trump was even declaring victory before the actual results came in days later.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. As far as I'm concerned, we already have won it.
False. And that was incriminating, declaring a false win before the votes were even counted all. But that alone isn't a crime. The report explains how that deceit, which you just heard, is one element of what prosecutors must prove. And that they state in the report it animated these deceptive means and independently criminal means later taken in Trump's failed bid to steal the election, which infamously took the plot right into Congress on January 6th, trying even to give a fraudulent elector slate to Mike Pence. And that's before any of those Trump allies stormed the Capitol and the horrors we saw afterward. Now, that was bad. It was mostly secret at the time, that elector fraud they were trying to kick over to Pence. But the report shines a light on the question, legally, how bad was it? What if you listen to people who say that was more symbolic, fight to the end, that it was, quote, hardball politics? Or was it more like blatant ballot stuffing, the kind depicted in political cartoons like this, which decry illegal vote stealing by any party? This from an 1880s Harper's Magazine. Or here's a modern political cartoon that imagined threats at the literal ballot, generated by AI, by the way. So the canvas evolves, but these type of election threats endure. And this is news tonight because I have a new answer from Jack Smith himself, noting that while they were not in the back room altering the vote tallies or stuffing falsified ballots into the ballot boxes, like those proverbial cartoons I showed you, quote, Trump and the co-conspirators nonetheless sought the same result, to cast aside legitimate votes, depriving citizens of their right to vote and have their votes counted. Jack Smith's prosecutor saying this was criminal ballot stuffing, just on an even larger scale. And so that right there are already just a few highlights. If you're counting, spend just about 5 minutes, and that's a lot of material that we are learning about how Jack Smith and his team approached this. Things we didn't know, things we would have loved to know from a journalistic or legal sense even just months ago. And then there are the lawyers. Donald Trump has long demanded that he wants to find his own Roy Cohn in government. That's quite a claim because the infamously discredited, disbarred lawyer has earned a place in legal histories about how not to practice law, how not to go to court. Today's report adds more incriminating material against two of Trump's lawyers in this whole matter. And they have faced discipline, not unlike Roy Cohn. And they're referred to as unindicted co-conspirators, Giuliani and Eastman, and both facing bar discipline, civil remedies over these related efforts from trying to steal the race. Now, the report is not designed and is not really trying to develop a new case on them. But remember, I mentioned how the law requires that Smith, any special counsel, explain some of the approaches that got them here. And so today, that actually required more material on those two discredited lawyers, to say the least, because of Trump's effort to hide alleged crimes behind them. So that's like the Roy Cohn move I'm mentioning. And this came up, remember, all the way back in the Mueller report when another Trump lawyer, Michael Cohen, had to pay and go to prison for now convicted crimes that were determined on Trump's behalf, and it was farmed out to a different office, and you might remember some of that history. Fast forward to now, and Smith's report explains why prosecutors were ready to defeat Donald Trump's attempted lawyer or counsel defense, noting Smith and the DOJ thought they would beat any advice of counsel defense because these kind of so-called lawyers were actually acting as accomplices to the crime. And to support that, the report notes Giuliani backing the original plot to declare victory before there was a winner called and then presenting knowingly false claims to state legislatures. Today's report, though, features him speaking in a way we've rarely heard. He rebuts the MAGA attacks that claim this was some sort of politicized witch hunt. Smith rebutting claims that he took orders from Biden as, in a word, laughable. All right. As another wordsmith, Nas, might say, it's comedy, it's hilarious. Look in the mirror. Tell me the times ain't the scariest. Point being, it may be laughable, but it is not funny when the stakes are this high and the times this intense. So we've just reported out the especially key points from this new report. At over 130 pages, we've got actually more in the rest of this program with Andrew Weissman and David Kelly coming up. But before I bring those experienced prosecutors in, I want to try to tie this together, especially if you're at home going, all right, after all this, this is what we got, and I guess Trump got away, and the anchorman, Ari, is telling me details, but what's the point of all this? Where are we landing? And I will do my level best to tell you the facts and the evidence, totally separate from what people, myself included, might think in opinion about it. Let's go to the evidence. Here's what you need to know. This probe is now closed. Its federal indictments of those several plots that we have tracked with regard to former defendant Trump are now formally dismissed. We've shown you this chart over the years. We legally update it now with this news. That's an outcome that Smith certainly views as incomplete, given a plan to bring the case to trial where he says he had the evidence to convict Trump. That's where we are. The federal January 6 coup probe is over with this report today. And to hear Jack Smith tell it, they cracked the case. They found the guy. They know who they say did it. Even though, as I mentioned, legally he's presumed innocent, they say they know who did it. They got him. They indicted him. And according to Smith, they were ready to give him his day in court until his lawyers, political allies, and a Supreme Court he helped appoint delayed that day in court, that reckoning, that trial, past an election that he then won, which kicked in the legal restrictions that were not a secret and not a conspiracy, quote unquote. They were something everyone knew about. And that's part of the ending. The related DOJ January 6 probe, which is the largest in U.S. history, has put many people behind bars. It has a strong record of legal accomplishment. Some of them are hoping for Donald Trump to break them out of jail with pardons. Many of them have served a chunk of their time. And then Trump's own lawyers and aides, as you can see from a reckoning chart where we can barely fit all of the different consequences, including state cases that Donald Trump cannot and never has the power to pardon, they've been punished for their involvement, from disbarment to convictions, prison time for 2 Trump former aides who stonewalled the House Jan 6 probe. The system may be a long way from full accountability, as always, depending on who defines it. But again, I said I'd show you the evidence. It is a very long way from no accountability for anyone involved, including the leaders, the lawyers, who Smith calls accomplices. We've seen careers and lives upended, and a warning, as Smith wrote, would be for the next would-be co-conspirators to think twice before you end up like any of these individuals. So you take it all together, that's what's happening. You could hear almost through the pages of this report the stern, fair judgment of Jack Smith and his team. If they are disappointed in the outcome, they are not putting spin on the ball. There are other parts of the report I'm going to get to, including their explanation of why they didn't use the Insurrection Act on Donald Trump, and the Donald Trump team's response, which includes, interestingly, a shout-out to none other than Bob Mueller, which makes you know it's a funny kind of news day. But when you look at this all together, something is happening. It's not what Jack Smith wanted. He made that clear. It's not what a lot of other people think justice should require. But it is a heck of a long way from January 7th, when there had been no accountability for anyone, no reckoning for Donald Trump and his aides, and remember, no indictment of any former president ever in American history.
The deadly California wildfires continue to burn across the Los Angeles area with no end in sight. The state is already working on a plan to rebuild. Tonight, MSNBC's Jen Psaki was in Altadena, California, where she spoke to Governor Gavin Newsom. They discussed the process of rebuilding, the attacks and misinformation coming from President-elect Trump, and threats by Republican lawmakers in Congress to put conditions on emergency aid.
House Speaker Mike Johnson suggested additional aid might have to come with certain conditions. Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso said he expects funding to have strings attached. Senator Tuberville even said California doesn't deserve anything, saying, quote, unless they show us they are going to make some changes. You have been here on the ground in communities for the last week. What is your reaction to the response from leaders in Washington?
Well, if that's leadership, I have a different definition. I imagine would be universally felt here. It's I'm not meeting Democrats, I'm not meeting Republicans, I'm not meeting Californians. I'm meeting American citizens desperate in need, and what they need is empathy, care, compassion, understanding. They need support, not rhetoric, not strings attached. I mean, I met families who lost not only their home, but their business and their church, their sense of self, place, community. They had a Zoom the other night, and everyone broke down crying because all they wanted to do was see the faces of one another. Mm-hmm. And yet that's the face of leadership in the United States of America, conditioning aid to the American people in need, politicizing this tragic moment. So I'll spare any more commentary on it, except to say I would encourage these people. They're human beings, they're parents. I respect that. Come out here, visit with these folks. And let's have a conversation after that.
I'm more interested from you and how damaging it is when you have somebody with that type of a platform who is next week going to be the president of the United States is injecting inaccurate information about the worst wildfires in American history.
Let me answer that by thanking President of the United States, Joe Biden, who within 36 hours supported a major disaster declaration by text. Within a few minutes later, committed 100. He could have just committed 75%, 90. He said 100% of all the costs for disaster recovery. That took the time to meet with first responders, was here on the ground. I want to thank President Joe Biden. And then I want to offer that as an example to the incoming president of presidential leadership, a president of the United States of America, being here for the American citizen. He didn't ask me, is this a conservative part of California, Altadena? Did they vote for me? What, he didn't ask for his staff to look at the last election and see how many were for Kamala or how many were for Donald Trump. He said, pal, you got it. We have their backs. Express empathy. I have firefighters that went up to him and they had tears in his eyes after meeting Joe Biden, who was consoling them. I think that's an example for the incoming president. What's not, I think, helpful or beneficial is the string of consciousness, these wild-eyed fantasies that somehow the State Water Project, we have reservoirs that are at or near historic highs, full, completely full, that somehow there's a magical spigot in California, in Northern California, that just can be turned on and all of a sudden there'll be rain or water flowing everywhere. It's not helpful. It's damaging to the very foundation of the notion of what are facts, what are truths. And the fact of that asymmetry, that's profound and consequential, amplified by people like, let's be candid, Elon Musk and others. And that 1-2 punch is real. And it's not just about this fire. And as our hurricane force winds of mis and disinformation that can divide a country on a myriad of issues, this is serious. And, I get it. They want to take us. I get it. I'm not naive. I get the California derangement syndrome. I've been living with that for years and years. New scum. The same 7th grade. I remember the guy on Baltimore Avenue that called me new scum. I was in 7th grade. I can handle that. We'll leave that aside. I understand what they're trying to do. I want to work with them. It's not about me. It's about people that we both represent. He represents and I represent. And I'm honored and proud to represent these folks. And I desperately plead with them. Come out here. Help us. And we will help you. You'll be elevated, Mr. President. At the end of the day, you'll be the one we all will go to and say, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for living up to the values of this country. Thank you for having the backs of these families and these kids. I met a kid the other day, literally was driving away. Their house was on fire in the Palisades. And the young daughter said, Daddy, did you get my bunny? And he said, I didn't get your bunny. I got 4 kids. Mm-hmm. That's what I hope that President of the United States, President Trump, has an opportunity to meet with that family.
And Jen Psaki, host of Inside with Jen Psaki here on MSNBC, joins me now. Jen, great interview today.
Hi, Chris.
Let's talk first about just your sense of right now. So there's sort of 2 stages, right? Like, they got to get the fires under control, and it is very difficult, if not impossible, with the winds going as they are. What your understanding from the interview is about how feasible that is, and if there's a time frame they can even put on it.
Well, we talked about that a little bit in the interview, too, Chris. As you mentioned earlier, there is an expectation of increased winds overnight. We talked about the preparations they're putting in place for that. He has what he needs in preparation for that. But there are 2 stages right now. There is dealing with the weather and Mother Nature, and then there is also planning for the recovery and the rebuilding, which is happening at the same time. There's 100,000 people who have lost their homes, people who have lost their schools, lost their churches, lost there's also predatory behavior that's happening out there that he's learned from people in the community as well. So these are all of the things he's navigating. We talked about all of them. It is also happening at the same time where you're dealing with the worst wildfires in American history, and he's dealing with the worst disinformation space happening at the same time. And Republicans in Washington who want to condition aid and push this disinformation. So these are all the challenges that he is facing. I've interviewed him a number of times. I know you have too. I've never seen him as emotional and as distressed as he is in this moment, for good reason, for understandable reason. But it is whack-a-mole in trying to get information out to the people in the state, the people who are impacted by these fires, because of forces like the incoming president and his best friend Elon Musk, who are working on the other side.
The thing I've talked to a bunch of people in California, of course, like we all have, everyone I think is 1 degree at most removed from this in many respects. So many people's lives have been touched. Aside from the profound loss at the deep emotional level of like losing your home, there's also then just the sheer hassle that you are staring down. And this is a state that has underproduced housing for a long time, where housing supply has been constrained. You've got stories of Zillow prices being jacked through the roof. You've now got, 1,600 households that are all now looking to rent at the same time. Like, any sense of how you essentially deal with that from a governmental perspective?
Well, they're going to need tens of billions of dollars, is what he said. They don't have an exact number. There's been a lot of numbers thrown out there. President Biden said tens of billions. Some have suggested 50 billion. They don't know exactly yet, right? Because they're doing a survey of the damage without knowing the full extent of the damage. And then there's this question of home insurance, which, as you know, has been a long, challenging issue in the state of California. Major insurers pulled out of insuring homes in California. They have a program in California, but is that going to have enough funding to cover the cost of what everybody needs? And how long is that going to take? And it's going to take months and months and months even to clear the debris and clear the damage. The other tough question I know you've talked about, Chris, and I talked with the governor about are there tough conversations that need to happen about where you can rebuild, which is difficult. Some of these communities have tremendous, Altadena is one of them, histories, right? And is there going to need to be, in addition to the funding, a response from the federal government that is like in the years after Katrina, which we talked about as well, which is rebuilding the infrastructure and the waterways and making sure that it's safe to build upon. So those are all of the challenges, and that's the stage after containment, after these fires are stopped. Those are all things that he and the government are certainly contemplating at this point in time.
Did you get a sense quickly, just in the last minute here, of how much the sort of national conversation matters there, or is it just such a different situation on the ground that, like, the nonsense on cable news doesn't penetrate?
I mean, by nonsense, do you mean the suggestion that aid should be conditioned and that they don't deserve assistance, that kind of nonsense, that kind of stuff? I think what we talked about a bit also was the role of somebody like Elon Musk, who firefighters had to explain to him what the facts on the ground are. That's what they're dealing with. So it doesn't feel good. And we talked about this, too. When you've lost your home, you've lost your school, you've lost your church, your place of worship, and you are dealing with absurd political debates when that has never historically been the case. I mean, Louisiana is a place where, and he talked about this, he was proud to support funding after Hurricane Katrina. Mike Johnson is a person who's saying aid should be conditioned.
Well, it wasn't always this way. Back when I was the staff director of the Senate Finance Committee, I helped that committee run several confirmation hearings, dozens of them, for Treasury Department nominations, Health and Human Services Department nominations, and others. And at every one of those hearings, both sides always asked serious questions, always. In fact, each senator on both sides in those days asked serious questions. Some were better questions than others, but they were all serious. That was the minimum standard, serious. In the 21st century Trump Republican Party in the United States Senate, serious questions are disappearing.
How many push-ups can you do?
I did 5 sets of 47 this morning.
The top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee today, Jack Reed of Rhode Island, the former chairman of that committee, began the hearing on the Democratic side of the panel by telling Pete Hegseth he is the first nominee for Secretary of Defense who he cannot vote for, including both of Donald Trump's previous nominees for Secretary of Defense, who Jack Reed supported.
Mr. Hegseth, you are the 9th nominee for Secretary of Defense that I've had the honor to consider as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I have voted in favor of all your predecessors, including those in the first Trump administration. Unfortunately, you lack the character and composure and competence to hold the position of Secretary of Defense. Thank you.
And then it got worse for Pete Hegseth.
I want to return to the incident that you referenced a minute ago that occurred in Monterey, California in October 2017. At that time, you were still married to your second wife, correct? I believe so. And you had just fathered a child by a woman who would later become your third wife, correct?
Senator, I was falsely charged, fully investigated and completely cleared.
So you think you are completely cleared because you committed no crime. That's your definition of cleared? You had just fathered a child 2 months before by a woman that was not your wife. I am shocked that you would stand here and say you're completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared? How is that a complete clear?
Senator, the child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth, and she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she was, and you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
Those were false charges.
Well,
it was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared. And I am so grateful for the marriage I have to this amazing woman behind me.
You've admitted that you had sex at that hotel in October 2017. You said it was consensual, isn't that correct?
Anything?
You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
Again,
how do you explain your judgment?
Completely false charges against me. You fully investigated, and I was completely clear.
You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that. Now, if it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
It was a false claim then and a false claim now.
If it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
That was a false claim.
So you
talking about a hypothetical.
So you can't tell me whether someone who has committed a sexual assault is disqualified from being Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I know in my instance, and I'm talking about my instance only, it was a false claim.
But you acknowledge, that you cheated on your wife and that you cheated on the woman by whom you had just fathered a child. You have admitted that.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good. I assume that in each of your weddings, you've pledged to be faithful to your wife. You've taken an oath to do that, haven't you?
Senator, as I've acknowledged to everyone in this committee, not a perfect person, not claiming to be.
But no, I just asked a simple question. You've taken an oath like you would take an oath to be Secretary of Defense in all of your weddings to be faithful to your wife. Is that correct?
I have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
The incident in Monterey led to a criminal charge, a criminal investigation, a private settlement, and a cash payment to the woman who filed the complaint. And there was also a non-disclosure agreement, correct?
It was a confidential settlement agreement off of a nuisance lawsuit.
Right. During an interview, you claimed that you settled the matter because you were worried that if it became public, it might hurt your career. Do you maintain that you were blackmailed?
Senator, I maintain that false claims were made against me. And ultimately,
your attorney
those
used
false
the
claims,
phrase,
I have the opportunity to attest my innocence in those false claims.
But you didn't reveal any of this to President Trump or the transition team as they were considering you to be nominated for Secretary of Defense. You didn't reveal the action. You didn't reveal the criminal complaint. You didn't reveal the criminal investigation. You didn't reveal the settlement. You didn't reveal the cash payment. Why didn't you inform the commander-in-chief of the transition team of this very relevant event?
Senator, I've appreciated every part of the process with the transition team. They have been open and honest with me. We've had great conversations between the two of us. And I appreciate the opportunity that President-elect Trump has given me.
You chose not to reveal this, right? Because you knew it would hurt your chances. So you chose not to reveal this really important thing to the commander-in-chief of the transition team because you were worried about your chances rather than trying to be candid with the future president of the United States. Are there any other important facts that you chose not to reveal to the president-elect and his team as they were considering you to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I sit here before you in open book, as everyone who's watched this process.
With multiple non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements tying the hands of many people who would like to comment to us. One of your colleagues said that you got drunk at an event at a bar and chanted, "Kill all Muslims." Another colleague, not anonymous, we have this, said that you took co-workers to a strip club. You were drunk, you tried to dance with strippers, you had to be held off the stage, and one of your employees in that event filed a sexual harassment charge as a result of it. Now, I know you deny these things, but isn't that the kind of behavior that, if true, would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, anonymous false charges.
They're not anonymous. And I'll just conclude and say this to the chairman. You claim that this was all anonymous. We have seen records with names attached to all of these, including the name of your own mother. So don't make this into some anonymous press thing.
The New York Times headline on the hearing said Hegseth won't say whether sexual assault, drinking, or adultery is disqualifying. Decorated combat veteran Tammy Duckworth, who lost both of her legs in combat as a helicopter pilot, said this.
How can we ask these warriors to train and perform the absolute highest standards when you are asking us to lower the standards to make you the Secretary of Defense simply because you are buddies with our president-elect?
Lower the standards. That is what Donald Trump has done every day of his political life. That is what Republican senators did today for the job of Secretary of Defense of the United States of America. Lower the standards. The vote in the Senate on the Hegseth nomination is going to be a vote to lower the standards, yes or no. And Republicans, who are constantly claiming to believe in nothing but meritocracy, will vote to lower the standards, and Democrats will vote to preserve the standards.
Let me make it clear. You can't seem to grasp that there is no U.S. military as we know it without the incredible women that we serve. Women who've earned their place in their units. You have not earned your place as Secretary of Defense.
Senator Elizabeth Warren easily exposed the naked hypocrisy of Pete Hegseth's plans for the American military and what appeared to possibly be his own plan to get as rich as possible from defense contractors for years from now if he gets the big job.
Now, Mr. Hegstaff, you have written that after they retire, generals should be banned from working for the defense industry for 10 years. You and I agree on the corrosive effects of the revolving door between the Pentagon and defense contractors. It's something I would have liked to talk with you about if you'd come and been willing to visit with me. But the question I have for you on this is, will you put your money where your mouth is and agree that when you leave this job, you will not work for the defense industry for 10 years?
Senator, it's not even a question I've thought about because it's not
about it right now.
It's not one. My motivation for this job
I understand
has never
that. I
been
just
about
need
what
a
could
yes or no
conceivably
here.
come next.
Time is short. I just need a yes or no.
I would consult with the president about what the policy should be
In
at the Defense
other
Department.
words, you're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years. But you're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator.
You'll be the one, let us just be clear, in charge of the generals. So you're saying sauce for the goose, but certainly not sauce for the gander?
I would want to see what the policy of the president
Oh, I'll
is.
bet you would.
Thank you, Senator Warren.
In just 5 days, TikTok faces a complete ban in the U.S. I do not know where people will learn to put makeup on, dance, or cook food. But today, Bloomberg is reporting that China is now weighing a new plan to save the platform by potentially selling its U.S. operations to one particular buyer, Elon Musk. Multiple sources tell Bloomberg that Chinese officials strongly prefer that TikTok remains owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company. But a possible high-profile deal with, of course, one of Trump's closest allies does hold some appeal to the Chinese government. Now, a representative for ByteDance has called the report pure fiction, and Elon Musk and his team have said absolutely nothing. So let's discuss. Back with us, Ron Insana, CNBC senior analyst and CEO of iFi.ai, and Max Chafkin joins us, Bloomberg Businessweek journalist and co-host of the podcast Elon Inc. Okay, Max, it is Bloomberg reporting. Explain this. Despite a denial from ByteDance, nothing from Musk, could he actually buy TikTok?
Well, we should say this is Chinese officials. This is not ByteDance necessarily doing the talking. You could kind of understand why they might be talking about this. This ban is coming down the pipe unless the Supreme Court intervenes, which it doesn't appear they will. And TikTok is a strategic asset to the Chinese government. So if they're trying to preserve this, a little bit of potential influence anyway that they have in the United States, who better than Elon Musk? And when you start thinking about who the other potential acquirers here who would be acceptable to the Chinese government and acceptable to the Trump administration, it's sort of hard to think of a lot of other candidates. Elon Musk, for better or worse, and he gets criticized a lot by both Democrats and Republicans, has a very, very good relationship with the Chinese government. And so you can see why they would like this. You can also see why Trump might go along with it.
I don't know. I got three letters that keep coming to mind. The FCC, antitrust regulations that we once had, right? Antitrust regulations that are focused on making sure no one individual, no one company has a monopoly on a specific industry, right? If this were to happen, would this not be like case number one of the mergers and acquisitions bonanza we're about to head into for the next 4 years?
100%. Listen, to think that there's going to be any deal. Now, the Supreme Court obviously can still block this deal from happening. I don't know that there's any injunction you can get against the Supreme Court that would reverse their decision. Having said that, though, Steph, you hit at the point, which is it's going to be an M&A bonanza. There's nothing to block any deals that are in the pipeline once we change administrations. As much as President Biden tried to block the Nippon U.S. Steel deal, and President Trump may do that for the same reason, when it comes to mergers and acquisitions going forward, we're already seeing deals in the pipeline. We're already seeing companies anticipate very little regulatory scrutiny, whether it's monopolistic behavior, whether it's consumer protection, you name it.
And we should remind our audience, right, that the reason antitrust regulations are in place are not to be anti-business. It's to protect consumers.
Correct.
It's to make sure things are still competitive.
But it's also not 1974 anymore. And they've been gone for a long time. I mean, there have been attempts to enforce what used to be called the Sherman Antitrust Act, which goes back to the early 20th century. And over the course of the last several decades, each and every one of these laws, rules, regulations has been watered down, and we're seeing more and more concentration in business.
Okay, but I just want to talk about what we're seeing this week, because if people out there are not already worried or on high alert that the kind of capitalism this country has been practicing for decades is slipping into kleptocracy, just look at what we're looking at this week, right? That Elon Musk, who already controls, well, Tesla's over here, already controls Twitter, X, now could control TikTok, put that in one corner. And then the other corner, you've got Mark Zuckerberg in the last week doing cartwheels, turning himself inside out, pretending to be some sort of alpha male, pounding his chest, changing the rules of his company to curry favors with Donald Trump for all sorts of things he wants, like making sure the TikTok ban holds. Because what does Zuckerberg not want? TikTok here, because TikTok has been eating the lunch of an industry he once dominated.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trump has said, like, the reason that Trump gave for switching his position on the TikTok ban was that he wanted to hurt Facebook. We just saw this report from NBC that Zuckerberg, Musk, and Bezos are all going to be sitting together, at the inauguration. And it really feels like, we're just seeing this kind of closing in of these tech CEOs, and they're all jockeying for position. And, right now you got to say that Musk is in the lead as the biggest spender, the $250 million compared to Zuckerberg's $1 million.
Okay, but even if he's in the lead, let's just talk about that, right? You could say lots of companies, give to politicians on both sides of the aisle. They go to inaugurations, but let's really talk about who's going and where we are. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, given a ton of money. They're
Tim
going.
Cook, don't forget him.
Yes, but but these three guys are going to the inauguration. They are sitting together, and they're even sitting with Trump's cabinet picks, right? So the VIP seats, okay? What do these three people have in common? They all are masters of industry in tech, right? Industries like social media platforms. They care a lot about artificial intelligence. You can throw crypto in there. These are all industries that face potential huge regulatory changes in the next 4 years, right? These are all industries that Donald Trump does not have specific ideology on. And if these men can control or influence regulation there, they will end up wealthier in the next 4 years, there will be more zeros next to their names than any one of us can even count. Do people realize that?
I don't know. There does not seem to be any pushback, and you and I talked about this off camera, whatsoever to what's going on at this point in time. I mean, the single most conflicted individual at the moment is Elon Musk. I mean, you mentioned the companies that he has, Twitter, X, Tesla, but there's also Starlink and SpaceX, which are defense contractors. And so here's a man worth $400 billion who is going to the inauguration, who one report suggests may have an office in the old executive office building where the vice president sits on a daily basis and have unfettered access to the president of the United States as a private citizen, not as a government employee. So where the outrage would normally reside is totally absent here.
If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it count? If a conflict of interest prevails and everyone keeps saying, keep on trucking, will it matter?
Now, I think there will be pushback, and I think we're actually already seeing it. You know, on social media over the last couple of days, you've seen a lot of Zoomers, you know, kind of jokingly signing up for these Chinese competitors, sort of like almost trying to make the point that, like, we're not going to be pushed around by people.
But what if he owns all the platforms? Where's the pushback going to happen?
And, I mean, I think there is competition, right? There's Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and people can also just tune out. You know, and I think we're starting to see, but in the electric car market, you're starting to see Tesla's sales like not looking as great. It's hard to know exactly why that's happening. It may have nothing to do with politics, but it may have a lot to do with politics.
Okay, I've run out of time, but the point I did want to make, you know, I don't know if you saw, Jamie Dimon did an interview on CBS this weekend, right? Jamie Dimon has not been super critical of Donald Trump. He's been somewhat complimentary. He said he's open to doing business with him. But you don't see Jamie Dimon racing on down to Mar-a-Lago. You don't see Jamie Dimon sitting next to him at the inauguration. There's a difference between being a CEO and having to do business with the White House. I'm sure once Trump is president, if Jamie Dimon gets called down to the White House, he will show up. He will obviously work with or meet with the Treasury Secretary. That is different from Mark Zuckerberg, who I'm going to say I'm more of an alpha male than he is now saying his company.
You're going to bring some more masculine energy to MSNBC?
I'm going to bring some more masculine. His company needs more masculine energy. My question is, Sheryl Sandberg, guess you ain't leaning in now that you're just sitting on the board.